The market square fell completely silent when the silver-armored soldiers stepped through the shimmer. Sera's needle froze above the fabric she was mending, her breath catching somewhere between her ribs and her throat. She knew what silver armor meant. Everyone in the border towns knew. When the Court of Mirrors sent soldiers into the human world, someone was about to lose something they could not get back. Please, she thought, though she could not have said who she was asking. We are looking for the weaver's granddaughter, the lead soldier announced. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone who had delivered bad news so many times it had stopped feeling like news. His eyes, colorless as winter fog, swept the square with mechanical precision. Behind her, Sera felt her grandmother's hand find her shoulder. Child, the old woman whispered, just the one word, just her name for her when things were serious. That would be me. Sera set down her needle and stood. She was not brave by nature. She was practical. And practically speaking, making soldiers wait only made things worse. The lead soldier's expression did not change, but something shifted in those colorless eyes. Slight surprise, perhaps. Most humans cowered. The debt your grandmother carries has come due. Lord Caelum of the Court of Mirrors requires your presence at the palace immediately. She is 23 years old, her grandmother said, stepping forward. Her voice only trembled a little. She has nothing to do with what I agreed to. She has everything to do with it, the soldier said. Those were the terms. The weaver's most precious work rendered in service to the court when the debt matured. Your granddaughter has been your most precious work for 23 years. You made her, that makes her the debt. Sera had heard stories about her grandmother's bargain her whole life, the way most people in border towns heard stories about fey contracts. In pieces, sideways, never quite directly. She knew her grandmother had been desperate after the flooding took everything. She knew she had asked the Court of Mirrors for help rebuilding. She knew the court had agreed. She had never known the precise terms until this moment. I will go, she said. Sera, no. Grandmother, she turned, took the old woman's face in her hands. The face that had bent over her through every fever, every heartbreak, every failed attempt at spinning silk that was too fine for human fingers. You have been carrying this for 23 years. Put it down. The journey to the Court of Mirrors took no time at all, which was somehow worse than taking 3 days. One moment Sera was standing in the market square. The next she was standing somewhere that was not a room exactly, but felt like standing inside a diamond, every surface reflective, every angle catching light that came from no visible source. She was alone. She was not alone for long. You are smaller than I expected. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Then the owner of the voice stepped out of a reflection, which was not a comfortable thing to watch. Sera had expected something obviously inhuman. Something that would make the fear make sense, that would explain why her entire body had gone rigid the moment she heard that voice. Lord Caelum of the Court of Mirrors looked like someone had taken the idea of a human man and made it in a material that was not quite flesh. Too precise, too still, too beautiful in the way that certain dangerous things were beautiful, the way deep water was beautiful, the way lightning was beautiful. He had silver hair that moved when there was no wind and eyes the color of mirrors, reflective, showing her own face back at her. He was also, unmistakably, deeply irritated about something. You are the grandmother's granddaughter, he said, circling her with the unhurried assessment of someone who had all the time in existence. And you are the Fey Lord who turned my grandmother's debt into a human trafficking arrangement, Sera said. So we both have things to live down. The court chamber went dangerously quiet. Lord Caelum stopped circling, his mirror eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. You dare. I dare answer a question you asked, Sera said. You said I was smaller than you expected. I told you something true about you in return. I thought Fae valued honesty. A sound moved through the chamber, not quite laughter, something more controlled than laughter but in the same family. We value honesty, Caelum said slowly. We also value knowing when to deploy it and when silence is the wiser strategy. Then I will learn. Sera met his mirrored gaze without flinching, though her heart was slamming hard enough that she suspected he could hear it. But I do not think lying down and pretending this is acceptable is wisdom. I think that is just fear dressed up in better clothes. Lord Caelum looked at her for a long moment. The terms of your grandmother's debt, he said, finally resuming his circuit of the room, moving to a throne that looked like it had grown there rather than been built, require that you serve the court in whatever capacity I deem appropriate for as long as I determine the debt requires. This could be years, decades. I do not experience time the way your kind does. And if I refuse, then your grandmother's debt comes due in full immediately in whatever form I choose. I have been patient. 23 years is patience for a Fey Lord. His voice was entirely without warmth. Your choice. It is not a choice. No, he agreed, which surprised her. It is not, but it is what is available. Sera looked at this creature who owned her grandmother's contract, who had just folded her into the terms of a debt she had never agreed to, who held the fate of the only family she had left in his indifferent hands. I need a moment, she said. You have 5 minutes, he turned away, already dismissing her. Then we proceed. The Court of Mirrors had given Sera a room that was too beautiful to be comfortable. Every surface reflected her back at herself. She spent her first night unable to sleep, watching her own face stare at her from every wall, and thought about how perfectly the room suited its master. A court of reflections, ruled by a man who showed everyone their own face. She wondered if he knew what he looked like to others. She suspected, somehow, that he did not. That 3 centuries of being Lord of Mirrors had made him so accustomed to showing others back to themselves that he had forgotten to look at himself. The thought made her unexpectedly sad. She pushed it away firmly. You are not frightened, Lord Caelum observed, 3 days into her service. She was cataloguing his library, a task given to her apparently because she had mentioned in passing that her grandmother had taught her to read in 5 languages. The Fey Lord had appeared from somewhere unannounced, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through the world. I am frequently frightened, Sera corrected without looking up from the inventory. I simply do not find it useful to perform it. Most humans who come to this court cannot stop performing it. Most humans who come to this court were probably not raised by someone who faced down a flooding river with a bucket and sheer stubbornness. She carefully recorded the title in front of her. My grandmother taught me that fear tells you something is serious, not that it has already won. Caelum was quiet for a long moment. She had already learned his silences came in different textures. This one was thoughtful rather than dismissive. What are you afraid of? He asked. Right now, cataloguing this incorrectly and having to start over. She glanced up. You have no organizational system. Do you know that? 3,000 years of accumulated texts and the filing system appears to be wherever there was space. Something crossed his mirrored eyes too quickly to read. I know where everything is. You know where everything is because you have been here for 3 centuries. What happens when you are not here? What happens if someone needs to find something quickly? She set down her pen. Your entire library is inside your head instead of on the shelves. That is not a system. That is a memory. I am immortal, my memory does not fail. Everyone's memory fails when they are poisoned or cursed or stabbed, Sera said pleasantly. I have been here 3 days and I have already read accounts of at least 4 assassination attempts. Caelum stared at her. I will, he said slowly, allow you to implement whatever organizational system you prefer. Thank you, she picked up her pen again. Also, your east wing has a structural problem in the 3rd corridor. I noticed the reflective panels are cracking from the inside out. That is usually a sign of something wrong with the foundation, but since your foundation is made of condensed magic, I suspect it is something else. I thought you should know. How did you notice that? I grew up in my grandmother's workshop. I learned to see where things were about to break before they broke. She shrugged. It is a useful skill in carpentry. Apparently also in enchanted palaces. Lord Caelum left without responding, but an hour later she heard activity in the East Wing corridor that sounded very much like someone investigating structural problems. She allowed herself a small, private smile and went back to cataloguing. You told me about the East Wing, Caelum said, appearing again without warning a week later. She had stopped flinching at his arrivals. The panels were failing. Another month and that entire section would have collapsed. I know, Sera carefully shelved the book she had been holding. Are you thanking me? I am noting that you could have said nothing. Let it collapse. Use the chaos to attempt escape. Escape to where? She turned to face him. I do not know where in the world this court is. I could not find my way home if I tried. And besides, she added before he could respond, collapsing corridors hurt people. Your servants are human mostly. I was not going to let people get hurt to make a point. Lord Caelum studied her with those mirror eyes. You are strange, he said. You said I was small when we met. Now I am strange. Your compliments need work. It was not a criticism. What was it? He was quiet for a moment that stretched. An observation. I have ruled this court for 300 years. I have encountered very few people who were genuinely strange to me, who did not behave exactly as I expected. And I behave unexpectedly. Constantly, something in his tone shifted, barely perceptibly. It is, he paused, not unpleasant. Sera looked at the Fey Lord who had claimed her like a debt payment, who moved through his own palace like a ghost, who surrounded himself with reflections and had apparently forgotten to look at his own. Have dinner with me tonight, she said. He blinked. It was the first fully human gesture she had seen from him. What? Dinner, a meal, shared. I have been eating alone in my rooms for a week and I am tired of it. You are apparently curious about why I am strange. She turned back to the shelves. We might as well be curious at each other over food. Dinner became a ritual. Caelum did not eat the way humans did, she discovered. He sustained himself on other things, things she politely decided not to investigate too closely. But he sat with her and he talked, and she found herself completely unprepared for how much she looked forward to it. He was brilliant in ways that were genuinely difficult to keep up with, and never once made her feel slow for needing him to explain things. He knew the history of everything, had lived through centuries she had only read about, and talked about them the way her grandmother talked about her own past, with fondness and grief in equal measure. You miss things, she said one evening, surprised. What things? The things that ended. Kingdoms, people, ways of doing things that do not exist anymore. She studied his face, trying to read the mirror eyes. You are lonely. I am a Fey Lord. That does not answer the question. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window of the private dining chamber, something that was not quite sky shifted through colours that had no names. Yes, he said finally, so quietly she almost missed it. I suppose I am. The simplicity of it broke something open in her chest. This creature who had power over life and time, who could rearrange the terms of reality, sitting across from a human woman in a room full of mirrors, admitting to loneliness. You could have companions, she said carefully. You have court members, surely, other Fey. Fey are political animals. Every relationship is a transaction. Every friendship is an investment. He picked up his cup, put it back down without drinking. I have not had a conversation in 200 years that was not, at some level, a negotiation. Ours is a negotiation. I am technically your indentured servant. No, the word came out firmly, almost sharply. What we do at dinner is not a negotiation. You say things to me that disadvantage you regularly. You pointed out my library's failures. You told me about the corridor. You just told me I am lonely. His mirror eyes met hers. None of those things benefit you. A negotiator would not say them. Sera thought about that. Then what am I? Caelum looked at her for a long moment, something moving behind those reflective eyes that she was only beginning to learn to read. I have not decided yet, he said. But he was almost smiling when he said it. 6 weeks into her service, Sera woke at midnight to a sound that was not a sound, more the feeling of a sound, a wrongness in the air that vibrated at the back of her teeth. She followed it. The east wing, she realized, the one she had warned him about. The repairs had not been enough. Something had worked its way through the magic of the foundation itself, something deliberate, not structural failure but sabotage. The walls were beginning to buckle, and in the center of the corridor, Caelum stood alone, his hands pressed to the cracking panels, his face a rigid mask of concentration. He was holding the whole section up, with his own power alone in the middle of the night. "Why didn't you call anyone?" Sera demanded. "It is the middle of the night." So, waking the court would create panic. His voice was strained in a way she had never heard from him. "I can manage this." "You cannot manage this alone, you are clearly barely holding it." "It is not your concern." "Stop saying things are not my concern when they clearly are," she snapped, moving to the wall beside him, pressing her own hands flat against the cracking panels. She did not have magic. She was entirely, completely, uselessly human. Except that her hands began to glow. Sera stared at them. "What?" "Your grandmother," Caelum said, and despite the strain, his voice held something like awe. "She bartered with Fey magic for 23 years. She absorbed trace amounts, not enough to use but enough to carry. She passed it to you through the years you lived with her." He met her eyes over the cracking wall. "Enough to anchor, hold steady." Sera did not fully understand what she was doing. She pressed her palms flat and thought about holding, about her grandmother's steadiness in a flooding river with a bucket, about deciding not to let things break. The gold light spread from her hands into the wall, met Caelum's silver, twined together. The cracking stopped. They stood there for a long time, her human warmth and his Fey power holding the corridor together between them, until he was able to properly repair the foundation, and she could finally lower her shaking arms. "You have magic," Caelum said. "Apparently by accident." "There are no accidents in Fey workings." He turned to face her fully, and his expression was open in a way she had never seen, something beneath the mirror surface exposed. "Your grandmother did not make a desperate bargain. She made a deliberate one. She understood exactly what 23 years of proximity to Fey contracts would pass to you." Sera went very still. "She knew," Caelum continued, "that the debt would eventually come to you. She knew you would come to this court. She made sure you would not come empty-handed." "You knew this?" "I suspected. I did not know for certain until just now." "But you knew enough to be suspicious when you sent soldiers to collect me." Sera stared at him. "Is that why you wanted me? Not just the debt, something about what I might carry?" Caelum was quiet for a long moment. The mirror eyes showed her own face, searching. "Yes," he said initially. "And now? Now I am finding it very difficult to remember that there was a strategic reason for anything." He said it like the admission cost him something. "You catalogued my library and fixed my filing system and told me I was lonely, and I cannot seem to care about anything else." Sera looked at this Fey Lord, 3 centuries old and achingly isolated, who had trapped her in a debt and somewhere along the way, without apparently intending to, had shown her his whole unguarded self. "I am furious with you," she said, "about the strategic interest, about knowing more than you told me." "Yes, we will talk about that." "Yes. But first," she reached out and took his hand, the first time she had touched him, feeling the cool, non-human quality of his skin and not pulling away. "Are you all right? You were holding that wall alone for over an hour." Something in his expression broke open completely. "No one," he said very quietly, "has asked me that in 300 years. Then people have been very foolish." She kept holding his hand. "Are you all right?" "I think," Caelum said, looking at their joined hands with mirror eyes that were, for once, showing something other than her reflection. Something of himself. "I think I am becoming so." They fought about the honesty later. Properly fought, Sera's voice raised, Caelum's control cracking in ways that made the mirror panels vibrate. She told him that power used without disclosure was still power used against someone. That wanting to protect her from knowing was the same logic that had led every person who ever kept a secret to keep it. That she was not made of glass. That she could have handled the truth. He said nothing to defend himself. He listened, really listened, in the way she had learned he had of making you feel like nothing else existed while you were speaking. When she was finished, he said, "You are right, I have no defense. I kept things because I was afraid. That is not a justification, it is just what happened." "Why afraid?" "Because you were the first thing in 3 centuries that I did not want to lose." His voice was entirely steady, which somehow made it more devastating. And I knew that if you understood the full scope of what I knew, you might leave, or hate me. And I could not seem to make myself risk that, even though keeping it from you was its own betrayal. Sera looked at him for a long time. Full honesty from now on, she said. Everything. I do not care if you think the truth will hurt me. I would rather be hurt by truth than protected by deception. Agreed. And you are going to tell me everything about what my grandmother did and why. All of it. All of it, he confirmed. Good, she crossed the space between them. Then tell me one more true thing right now. What do you want to know? Do you love me? Caelum looked at her with those mirror eyes that were, finally, showing her something she had not seen in them before. Not her own face reflected back, but his. Yes, he said simply, without qualification, completely. In a way I have no framework for because I have not felt it before. I love you and I kept things from you because of it, which is its own terrible irony. It is, she agreed. I love you too. It is extremely inconvenient. Catastrophic, really. She took his face in her hands, this ancient, lonely, mirror-eyed creature who had shown her his whole real self by accident. We will have to find a way to live with it. She kissed him, not a contract sealed, a choice made. His hands came up to hold her carefully, like she was both precious and real, and she felt him exhale for what seemed like the first time in 300 years. You have to let the others go, Sera told him 3 months later. They were reviewing court records together, a new habit, her practical eye catching what his centuries of assumption caused him to miss. What others? The debt holders, the families who owe the court contracts. She laid the documents flat. Look at this. 47 active debts. How many of them were made by desperate people who had no real alternatives? Most, he admitted. Then most of them are not debts, they are exploitation with a contract on top. She met his mirror eyes steadily. You are better than this system. You have been operating inside it so long you stopped questioning it. But you are the lord of this court, you can change the terms. If I release the debts, every Fey court will see it as weakness. Or, she interrupted, they will see the Lord of Mirrors making a strategic decision to build human alliances through generosity rather than coercion. Which would make the Court of Mirrors the most politically significant court in a generation. She tilted her head. You choose the framing. Caelum stared at her. You are doing the thing again, he said. What thing? The thing where you are clearly the most politically intelligent person in the room, and you are pretending it is just common sense. It is common sense, eh? Sera, he leaned across the table. You walked into my court as a debt payment, and inside 3 months you have reorganized my library, fixed my structural problems, convinced me to review 47 contracts, and apparently planned to reshape the entire relationship between this court and the human world. Something warm moved in those mirror eyes. When exactly did you decide to take over? She considered. Probably around day 3, she said, when I saw the filing system. He laughed, full and genuine and real. The sound of someone who had forgotten laughter existed being reminded. The debt, he said when he had recovered, your grandmother's contract. Yours, I cleared it 2 months ago. Sera went very still. What? Your work in the library alone was worth 3 times the original debt. The corridor repair cleared it entirely. He held her gaze. You have been free to leave for 8 weeks. The words landed like stones in still water. You did not tell me. No. Caelum. I know, he stood, moved to the window, his back to her. I know. I kept meaning to. And then another day would pass and you would say something that made me think about things differently, or we would have dinner and talk until the light changed, and I could not, he stopped. I could not make myself say the words that might make you go. That is the same lie as before. Yes, he turned, it is, I am sorry, truly. Sera stood up slowly. I am angry, she said. I know. But I am also staying. She crossed to him, because I want to, because this work matters. Because my grandmother gave me 23 years of preparation to end up exactly here, and I think she knew what she was doing. She stopped in front of him, and because I love you, which means we are going to do this properly. Full disclosure, no more strategic withholding. Yes, he said. And you are going to release those 47 debt holders? Yes. And we are going to build something here that works for both species, properly, not through coercion. Also yes, his mirror eyes were soft in a way she was still learning to read. Sera, you have been free for 8 weeks. Why are you staying? She looked up at him, this impossible ancient creature who had shown her his real face, who was learning to stop deflecting and start being known, who laughed now with his full chest rather than suppressing it. Because the best things, she said, are worth choosing. He pulled her close, and she felt him rest his forehead against hers, and for once the mirrors around them showed exactly what was there. Not reflections, just 2 people, choosing each other. Her grandmother came to visit in the spring. The old woman walked through the court of mirrors with wide eyes and steady hands, and when she found Sera in the library, surrounded by perfectly organized shelves and a fey lord who was trying very hard to look like he had not been in the middle of listening to her read aloud, she stopped. She looked at her granddaughter. She looked at the Lord of Mirrors. She looked back at her granddaughter. Well, she said, I hoped, but I did not dare assume. You planned this, Sera said. Grandmother, you knew exactly what the contract would pass to me. You knew the debt would eventually come due, you chose me. I raised you, the old woman corrected gently. Everything I chose for you. She glanced at Caelum. Is he good to you? He is learning, Sera said. She is teaching me, Caelum said at the same moment. Her grandmother smiled, the specific smile of someone who had bet everything on something uncertain and watched it come right. Good, she said, then I can go home with a light heart. Later, after the old woman was settled in rooms that Sera had personally ensured had no reflective surfaces, Caelum found Sera on the balcony watching the not-quite sky shift through its nameless colours. She is extraordinary, he said, your grandmother. She is stubborn and sentimental, and she planned my entire destiny without telling me, Sera agreed. I am absolutely furious with her. And Sera leaned into his side, feeling his arm come around her. And I cannot decide whether to thank her. She gave you to me, Caelum said quietly. I would like to thank her. Give it time, Sera said. She will absolutely find ways to be insufferable about being right. He pressed his lips to her temple, and Sera looked out at the strange, beautiful light of his strange, beautiful court, and thought about how the best things in life arrived sideways, through unexpected doors, wrapped in circumstances that looked wrong until suddenly, they looked exactly right. One more thing, she said. What? The 47 debt holders, I want to invite them here, formally. Let them see what the court looks like from the inside. Let them meet the staff, the human servants, see how things actually work. She turned to look up at him, not charity, partnership, start it right. Caelum looked at her for a long moment with his mirror, eyes that no longer only showed her her own face back. When did you decide to redesign 3 centuries of diplomatic policy? He asked. Around the same time as the filing system, she said. He smiled completely, genuinely, the smile of someone who had been alone a very long time and had finally, improbably, found company worth keeping. Then let us begin, he said.